Welcome to the Cities of Migration Learning Exchange. Today's session brings you perspectives on Canada's Immigrant Future, a new project at Cities of Migration that explores the challenges and opportunities of immigration in our smaller cities, towns, and regions. The Immigrant Futures webinar series is presented in partnership with Hire Immigrants Magnet, Hamilton Economic Development, the City of Moncton, the Halifax Partnership, and the Leeds-Grenville Local Immigration Partnership, with funding support from Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada. Today's webinar, A Roadmap to Regional Prosperity, Municipal Leadership on Immigration Attraction and Retention, looks at population decline. Population decline and economic development needs are driving many small and mid-sized cities across Canada and the United States to invest in immigration as a strategy to unlock future prosperity and well-being. Putting out the welcome mat is a first step, but beyond welcoming, beyond arrival, how do cities create the conditions for the long-term success of newcomers, their families, and indeed every member of the community at large? For a growing number of smaller cities and regional hubs, that means mobilizing new stakeholders, including employers, chambers of commerce, local NGOs, public institutions, and multiple levels of government in a coordinated effort to align economic development and immigration goals to drive a strategic path forward. Today we'll hear from municipal leaders in Atlantic Canada and in Alaska, USA, who are designing a roadmap to their immigrant future through action-oriented strategies for inclusive community growth. We are joined today by Angelique Reddy-Kalala, Immigration Strategy Officer with the City of Moncton, New Brunswick, and Mara Kimmel, First Lady of Anchorage, Municipality of Anchorage, Alaska. I'm delighted to welcome our first speaker. Angelique Reddy-Kalala is the Immigration Strategy Officer with the City of Moncton, one of the first such offices in Canada, which surprises everyone, where Angelique leads the development and implementation of the Greater Moncton Immigration Strategy. Angelique also led the implementation of the Greater Moncton Local Immigration Partnership and is currently the chair of its Labour Market Working Group. Angelique began her career in refugee settlement and programming at the Multicultural Association of Greater Moncton, later working with the YMCA of Greater Moncton as manager of community development on issues ranging from at-risk youth to managing international initiatives. We're delighted to have Angelique with us today. Welcome, Angelique. The podium is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Kim, and thank you everyone for joining here today. I hope you get quite a bit out of this presentation. I want to start first just situating where Moncton is in Canada, just in case you're joining internationally. So Moncton is on the east coast of Atlantic Canada, and it's actually the province's largest and fastest growing metropolitan area. We often say Greater Moncton, whereas we have 3 municipalities that work very closely together on immigration and economic development, and those are Moncton, Riverview, and Dieppe. I lead for the City of Moncton, and City of Moncton would be the largest city within their city, as well as the town of Riverview. We also are centrally located both on the east coast of Canada and also between western United States and Europe, and we offer a lot of strategic access to world markets. We also run on the Atlantic time zone, which overlaps with European and U.S. workday, which is important to also note. We have also many businesses that are now moving to our region, and we're often recognized as actually the lowest cost place to do business in Canada as well as the U.S. It's important to note, too, in 2018 we were recognized by BMO as the best city in Canada to find employment. And another important note, we are 20 minutes away from the warmest saltwater beaches in Canada. So that quality of life coupled with economic opportunities is a huge driver of our growth over the years. So why in terms of immigration? That's a really important point. So the City of Moncton is fully invested in both attracting immigrants and international students to our region, but also in retaining them. We firmly believe that not only does immigration support our current and future economic and population growth, it also creates a more vibrant and obviously interesting community. And we know that when people arrive here, like I had mentioned, we do have various employment opportunities awaiting them. So really the why for us, though, is really to support our economic growth. My position is held within the Economic Development Department with the City of Moncton. So we often use the lens, obviously, of our economic development and how immigration will impact that, as well as adding to that vibrancy. So it's important to kind of set the tone for the history of immigration in the Greater Moncton area, and specific with the City of Moncton's role. We saw that we needed to boost the amount of immigrants coming to Greater Moncton if we wanted to maintain our economic growth rate as the province's fastest growing area in terms of our economic growth. So since the 1980s, Greater Moncton has really been an economic success story in Atlantic Canada. And really between 1988 and 2011, our economy actually doubled in size. And also the number of people in the labor force further increased, as you can see, by 60%. However, at that time, most of the population growth was from local or from interprovincial migration. However, immigration has really become, over a very short period of time, our primary source of population growth for our region. So also it's really about the math too. That's an important point when you're bringing in such large amounts of new immigrants, obviously, is making that case, that economic case. So it's estimated that over the next 10 years in New Brunswick we'll have about 100,000 retirees and about 75,000 graduates. So as you can see there, we're going to have a deficit regardless of about 25,000, which is a huge deficit for our province. We also recognize that for our labor market to increase at about 1.5% per year, we do need to add about 55,000 additional workers, and so we still have a gap of about 80,000 workers over the next decade. And so that's one of the main reasons that we're fully invested into bringing workers and making sure that they're aligning with the labor market needs. So our city council and our mayor is also fully supportive of this. Council has adopted our immigration strategies. So our city is really all in, and we recognize that doing nothing in Atlantic Canada is not an option, and certainly for the City of Moncton it is not an option. We want to be involved and play a direct role in our population and economic growth for now and into the future. So in 2014, the first rendition of the immigration strategy was put in place. This is a regional strategy involving many partners. And it was a landmark document when it launched, as it was the first formal strategy meant to guide immigrant attraction and retention efforts in our region's history. And it was also one of the very few local immigration strategies across Canada at that time. The strategy that was in place in 2014 to 2018 really had three broad goals, as you can see there. So it was increase the amount of immigrants coming to our region to ensure our economy had the workforce needed to continue its growth, to boost efforts to support retention and integration of newcomers, and also to ensure that immigrant entrepreneurs play an increasingly important role in our region's economic growth. And underneath those three broad goals, there's actually 18 strategic objectives. So as a result of, in 2016, you could see that at that time, 51% of our population growth was coming from immigration, and that's since increased to 67% in 2018. So the City of Moncton actually led the implementation of this immigration strategy, and the Greater Moncton Local Immigration Partnership, in which the City of Moncton is the agreement holder, was tasked with implementing the strategy. And so that is very much a partnership between the City of Moncton Town Review, City of Dieppe, as well as the Province of New Brunswick, our settlement agencies, and various other actors. And really the implementation was further based on really tangible outcomes for newcomers. So it's one thing we recognize to have a strategy. It's another thing to put that strategy in place. And our community has certainly done a good job in doing that. And that's reflected in our immense growth in immigration and the amount of newcomers moving to our region. And I'll show that in some upcoming slides. So as you can see, in 2016, our population growth at that time was 51% coming from immigration. And at this point, it's 67% and climbing. We have also, through the immigration strategy and working with our provincial and federal partners, have more than doubled the amount of immigrants now moving to Greater Moncton, going up from about 630 permanent residents per year in 2013 to more than double that in 2018. We had hit around 1,400 or so, and this does not include international students or temporary residents either. So you can see here some of the immigration trends. So from 2013 right up into 2018. So per 10,000 population, Moncton saw a 42% increase from below the national average in Canada to above the national average at 95 immigrants now per 10,000 population. So we saw basically a huge increase over a very short period of time due to some of those tangible actions that were put in place as a result of the immigration strategy. And as I had said, that was over about a 4-year period we saw that immense growth rate increase. So, and this is another slide here also indicating, between 2014 to 2017, the slow growth scenario being in blue, moderate growth scenario green, high growth dark green, and then yellow is the actual immigrant population growth. So you can see in 2017, Moncton was actually close to the high growth scenario for permanent residents moving to our region. We saw much more of an increase again in 2018. So that was really due to working together to achieve the immigration strategy. And this is just another diagram as well, just to show that increase. So 2012 to 2014, about 700 immigrants per year, and then doubling that over the next 4 years. So implementing the strategy was key for our community. It took resources in order to get to where we were. So the City of Moncton hired a full-time employee for the last strategy to help implement it. So that is actually my position. We help lead the strategy with our partners and also implement tangible actions through it. And this has really allowed us to implement basically a concierge service where we work with employers, settlement agencies, newcomers, post-secondary institutions, and many more partners to ensure that everyone's working together, but that we're also working on common projects to help support newcomers and international students when they arrive. This position would also be very unique as well. It was the first one in the province of New Brunswick and has now expanded. So many other municipalities actually in New Brunswick have a similar position, and so that's exciting for our province. And it also shows that the Atlantic provinces are very invested in investing literally in their own cities, and that's at the municipal level. So one of the first priorities for me when I had first started was to implement the local immigration partnership, which is essentially a council consisting of a council and 4 working groups, and basically working out different sections of the strategy and putting some of those actions in place to help achieve that strategy. We are also the agreement holder with the Local Immigration Partnership, which is a federal initiative and is a promising practice across Canada for bringing stakeholders together. So any strategy is really as good as any of the actions you put in place, and so I did want to just touch on some of those key actions that we have led, particularly from the City of Moncton perspective, as our partners did many, many other things to help achieve our last strategy. So you can see here we've recently launched a new immigration website, and it's really a one-stop shop for everything that newcomers and potential immigrants need to know before they arrive and when they get here, and even 5 years later. And this is a regional activity involving Moncton, Riverview, and Dieppe. and all of our partners use this, and I would certainly encourage anyone who's looking to move to Greater Moncton to use this as a tool to help guide your settlement process. And it was really a part of a greater brand, which is Immigration Greater Moncton, which further consists of even newcomer guides that you can download, as well as other support material. And so essentially this website is really a one-stop shop for all the information that newcomers need to know prior to arrival and when they get here. And this was actually the first website of its kind at the municipal level in New Brunswick that is solely dedicated to newcomer attraction and services when people land. Another big focus for the City of Moncton is really aligning labor market needs with immigrants that are arriving here. So about 4 years ago, we developed immigrant, newcomer, and international student job fairs. And so those job fairs have garnered tremendous support from our employment sector. So you can see here a list of just some of the local employers that are present in Greater Moncton that have workforce needs. Those are just a few. There's many, many more. And so basically we do newcomer sector-specific job fairs about every 3 months. And so far we've filled close to 300 positions and are currently working with about 170 employers, bringing in about $11 million in payroll into our community. So it's a win-win. It's a win for our employers because they're able to meet with top international talent when people arrive here, as well as international students. So it's really helping to make that matchmaking process, and it's also a win for the newcomer too. So hopefully they'll have the opportunity to meet those employers and get their first Canadian work experience once they arrive in the Greater Moncton area. So really it's a matchmaking process that we're trying to achieve. So some of the sectors that we focus on are, for instance, finance, insurance, health, IT, trucking, and logistics, and hospitality, just to name a few. We've also implemented welcome events, and those welcome events are both for international students as well as newcomers. So they're annual events, and so far we've welcomed over 1,500 new residents to our community with the whole goal of literally thanking them for choosing Moncton and Greater Moncton as their community of choice, but also making sure that we're connecting them with services both on the personal side but also on the professional side as well. In mid-sized urban cities like Moncton, it's important to have a network, and networking opportunities such as these type of welcome events or going to their local Chamber of Commerce networking events, for instance, are important in order to be successful in smaller, mid-sized, or even large cities across Canada. The last immigration strategy was a tremendous success. We achieved almost all of our outcomes within that strategy, and I think anyone who would work on immigration strategies or any strategies would say that, you know, it's not oftentimes that you find a strategy that's been fully implemented, but I'm very happy to say that ours had virtually achieved that. Anything that was not achieved was brought forward to our current strategy, and we did receive an award, which is the Canadian Association of Municipal Administrators. So the City of Moncton actually won this year's CAMA Willis Award for Innovation among mid-sized Canadian cities for this immigration strategy. So, and so it's certainly one thing is the immigration strategy itself and its creation, but the biggest achievement, I think, was partners and immigrants themselves working together to achieve that strategy. And another important point, too, is Moncton is a bilingual city, Canada's first officially bilingual city and Canada's only officially bilingual province. So Francophone immigration is a high priority for our city and for our province. And something that a lot of people may not know, but actually Francophone immigration is really a huge asset for us. And for our future, bilingualism as much as possible obviously is key. And so you can see here that actually Moncton CMA ranks second in Canada for the most immigrants moving that are Francophone to our community. And so you can see that in the City of Moncton we have 67% of our residents are bilingual speakers with 67,000 and 48,000 as French as a mother tongue. So we're very proud obviously of our Acadian culture here and very thrilled to have so many Francophone immigrants moving to Greater Moncton. We also have about 1,155 immigrants or non-permanent residents living in Moncton with French as a mother tongue. So that's about 28% of all newcomers that are moving to Greater Moncton between 2011 and 2016 are Francophone. And our goal is to get to 33%, and that is also the provincial goal as well. So we feel quite confident that in our next couple of years we'll be able to achieve that, as many of our employers are looking for English speakers or bilingual. So if there are Francophones looking to move from other regions across Canada or of course internationally, Greater Moncton is a great choice for them. So when it comes to immigration rates as well, we're actually 10th out of 33 Canadian metropolitan areas across Canada when it comes to our per capita amount of immigrants that are moving to Moncton. And we also have the highest rate in Canada for French-speaking immigrant attraction, obviously outside of Quebec. So those are all points that are important to make and that we're very proud of with the City of Moncton and Greater Moncton, also obviously the province of New Brunswick. And so now I'd like to speak with you about that's kind of where we were and now moving into where we currently are and where we hope to go in the future. So we see that we have a very good base in terms of immigration. So we've put a lot of good strategies and actions in place. However, we do recognize we need to grow and we need to continue to work with the newcomers that are moving to our community to ensure that their needs are met. We very much recognize that people are making an immense decision when they're moving to a city, and we take that very seriously. So we really want to make sure that that concierge service and that alignment to, you know, whether their children want to play sports, what type of job they want to do, you know, anything that they want to do in terms of arts and culture, that we help meet those aspects of their lives. And so that is very important to us. So when it comes to growing our labor market, even for our next immigration strategy that we're working on right now implementing, we recognize that we want to continue to grow, obviously. And when we look at data going back to 2002, each 1% growth rate really in annual GDP requires a 0.7% growth in the size of the labor market. So continuing to focus on immigrant attraction for us is key, and that is a huge point in our next immigration strategy. We essentially need to double the numbers that we were bringing in 2018 of about 1,400. Well, we need to get a lot higher than that just to maintain our current growth trajectory for our region. And we obviously want a strong economy, and that was a big focus of this upcoming strategy. We need to have sustained tax revenue as well. We recognize we have a lot of people retiring in the Greater Moncton area, and that we need to continue to replace that labor force. The other great part about a big population growth on the other side of things, it's not just the retirees, but the more population obviously that comes to our region. It's more stores, more restaurants, more schools, you know, all sorts of new needs, which also bring in more labor market demand too. And that's one of the exciting things. We're seeing our city grow very quickly. And, you know, even right now, this year actually for the City of Moncton, we had the most building permits that we've ever had in history, almost reaching $250 million. So we're very excited about our growth, but that does require an increase in our labor force. And we do recognize, just similar to the rest of Canada, that we really want to leave a strong community for our future and for our children and all future generations. And that's a lot of the reason why we do the work we do. We want everyone to benefit and be successful. So for the next immigration strategy, it's actually a 4-year strategy. So currently we're working on that implementation plan right now. Our vision for this upcoming strategy is similar to before. However, we're honing in a little more. So it's basically that Greater Moncton is among the most attractive, inclusive inclusive places for newcomers in Canada. Mid-sized urban cities across Canada are becoming more involved in immigration, and we certainly want to be helping to lead that charge for smaller cities. So if people don't necessarily want to move to a huge city, well, they should likely start looking at smaller communities like Moncton to be able to move with their families. So in the next strategy, we have three main pillars. Attraction, like I had mentioned, continuing that pipeline of talent to our community, but also making sure that talent, the immigrants that are arriving, their skill sets align with the labor market. That's extremely important. Ensuring that newcomers put down roots, and so that's really looking at community services, our sports programs, all those type of things. So are people aware of them, and how can we make those connections? And also really broadening community collaboration and mobilization. So as we welcome more and more organizations, more and more people to our community, more immigrants, more international students, making sure that all partners are mobilized. And we really do that through our local immigration partnership. So under those three broad goals, there's actually 7 objectives, and so those are promoting Greater Moncton internationally and nationally as a destination to study, advance their careers and do business, the alignment to the labor market, as I had mentioned, that's very, very important to us. Expanding pathways for immigrants as well. So for instance, AIP in the last strategy was a great success. How can we make that also a permanent stream, but also look at other streams as well and trying to boost those for our community. We also recognize that with more people moving here, we need to significantly broaden both public awareness and also engagement, and also expanding on settlement services to make sure that as more immigrants move here, the settlement services are in line too with what the needs are. And then we also recognize we need to invest and strengthen immigrant support, the ecosystem that exists here, to make sure that, if there's a lot of immigrants, for instance, moving here with IT backgrounds that want to open startups here, that we have support services ready for them when they do arrive, for an example. We also want to ensure that we're really strengthening our leadership and advocacy role as well, and that's really important, especially as a municipal government. Arguably, there's no one level of government that's more interested in retaining their newest residents. And we do have that unique position where we're working to support our local employers. We're working with newcomers. We're working with all partners and all levels of government. So you certainly get, a full view of any cracks, whether it's in the economic or in the social system that do exist. And it allows us to pivot very quickly. So we're able to advocate to the other 2 levels of government, but also we're able to work with our community partners to ensure that those cracks are very much fixed, and that innovative programming or whatever it is put in place at a very speedy rate as well. So you can see here some of our targets for the next strategy. So in 2018, we had achieved about 1,450. Well, we recognize by this year we should be hitting, by 2020 we should be at a minimum of 1,900 and 2,700 by 2024. And really, you could see there our stretch goal of getting to 3,500. Our other big goal too is around Francophone immigration. So we want Francophone immigration to be 33% of the total amount of immigrants that are moving to our community should be Francophone or bilingual, to make sure that we're maintaining our linguistic balance. And so when it comes to the implementation of our immigration strategy, it is our local immigration partnership, which has about 23 different partner organizations and has about 80 different individuals from those organizations and immigrants themselves that sit on it. And they are tasked with implementing the immigration strategy. And so currently we're reviewing our current structure to make sure that they're in line with the next strategy as we hit the ground running in 2020 to implement that. An important point, too, since this is Cities of Migration, is really the roles of cities. So cities really do play a major role, especially small and urban-sized cities across Canada. And we firmly believe that cities that have an immigration mandate should be consulted by both the federal and provincial governments. We have a very good working relationship with our federal, or with our province here, the province of New Brunswick, as well as our federal parties. However, we do need to be consulted because obviously immigrants, they move to a country, they move to a province, but they move to a city. And when we're looking at retaining our newest residents, it's important that we're at the table and that we're able to provide input and advice and also services as needed. Cities also need resources as well in order to do so, so that whether it's the municipality investing themselves, such as in my position, or in other ways, we also need to be resourced in order to do that. and also looking at other kind of innovative practices, the Atlantic Immigration Pilot. One of the things we've said in the past is it should be a permanent stream for Atlantic Canada. However, we do recognize that there's many other streams, but in New Brunswick we do need increased allocation to be able to keep up with the labor market demand. We have employers at all times saying that they're missing labor force, and we do recognize that immigration plays a huge factor in that, and we do need more immigrants allocated for the province of New Brunswick, and the city certainly play a role in advocating for that. So our next immigration strategy is available through the links through Cities of Migration, so I certainly encourage you to download our new strategy as well as to visit our immigration website. And there's a lot of information on moving to Greater Moncton, the services that exist, and so I would certainly encourage you to also visit our website. The strategy is available actually on that website as well. And also if you want to see any upcoming events in Greater Moncton, you can also follow me on LinkedIn or just visit the event page of our website. So I want to thank you very much for this opportunity. I look very much forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Angelique, for sharing the success of the Greater Moncton Immigration Strategy, which really has leapt forward to launch the whole Moncton region, I think, and province into a brighter future. And I think it's a very important point that you've made at the end, that this is not just about growing a newcomer population, it's about growing a population of new permanent residents. So thank you very much. Congratulations on your success. So let's move over now from Moncton to Anchorage, Alaska. I'm delighted to introduce Mara Kimmel, our next speaker. Mara has a long career in Alaskan public policy focused on rights and justice in northern communities. She has been on faculty at the Seattle University School of Law, the University of Alaska Anchorage, and Alaska Pacific University, and currently serves a senior research fellow at the Anchorage Museum. In addition to teaching and research, Mara has worked as an immigration attorney and as an advocate for tribal subsistence rights. She currently leads the Welcoming and Resilience Initiative at the Municipality of Anchorage and serves on the National Board of Directors for Welcoming America, on the Regional Advisory Board for the Anti-Defamation League, and as a board president and co-founder of the Alaska Institute for Justice. Welcome, Mara. The podium is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Kim, and thank you, Angelique, for that amazing and impressive presentation on all that you've been able to do in Moncton. I think that the discussion that I will precipitate will describe sort of a different approach or a different end of the spectrum, in that what Anchorage is lacking is a specific human resource and a point person to really drive the migration policies. And a lot of that has to do with our politics and our political context, which we'll describe later. But so what we've been doing over the last 5 years is really trying to shift a framework and a context for understanding that there are newcomers in our community. So I think we'll present today a slightly different strategy and approach, much less formal, I think. So Anchorage, as you can see from the first slide, Alaska is at the top of the world, and we take great pride in the fact that we sit at the gateway to the Arctic, and we consider ourselves in Alaska as the reason that the United States is an Arctic nation. The city of Anchorage, Alaska sits on the traditional lands of the Dena'ina Athabascan people, and I was really grateful to hear the land acknowledgement that you started with, Kim. It's a very important component of the work that we do, particularly the welcoming work here in Alaska, is to begin every meeting and every public effort that we make and every public gathering that we have with a land acknowledgement. And I'll talk more about why that's so critical to our ability to welcome newcomers in just a moment. The population of our city is about 300,000. We are the largest community in America's Arctic. We serve as a hub community for the rest of the state, which has a total population of about 700,000. In our state, 20% of people are Indigenous, are Alaska Natives. And in our city, about 10% of our city's population is foreign-born. As I said, we are the largest city in the north, and we are the gateway to the Arctic. So in Alaska, as with other northern communities and northern regions, we're facing large transformations on 3 different fronts, all of which combine to create a broader context for the discussions that we have about migration and about who's living in our state. As the rest of the North completely understands, we are facing a climate crisis. I think the rest of the globe completely understands that. But in the North, the climate is changing at twice the rate of other parts of the world, and we see it every day. We just got our first snowfall, and up until last week, we were having rain instead of snow for the, and we had a Thanksgiving holiday and a Halloween with absolutely no snow. And that's a very unusual situation, but I think that the unusualness of all of this is becoming more and more of our norm. The changing climate is also part of a broader context of a changing economy as we look toward becoming a state that is moving beyond oil and the petroleum industry as our major economic driver. And then the third feature that I think we're facing dramatic changes regarding is the notion of equity and this idea of identity and who lives in our state. And so as I mentioned, climate change is a tremendous driver in our state and something that we are continually confronting and attempting to create adaptation policies around. And I mention this again even in the context of a migration seminar because it's really critical for us as a city to make sure that any of the work that we're doing on climate adaptation is built on notions of equity and inclusion and that we are bringing all voices to the table. It's also really important because Anchorage is going to be seeing a lot more population driven to our community, both from rural parts of the state, which as you can see in the top right corner photograph, communities are physically, existentially threatened as sea levels rise and as erosion is creating existential threats to literally the ground underneath the communities themselves. There's about 15 communities along the west coast of Alaska that are faced with the need to relocate fairly imminently. As a response, our city has been doing a great deal of work on climate adaptation and has really rooted notions of equity at the heart of that and has done a lot of outreach into our city's immigrant and refugee communities to make sure that the people who are being impacted by this are not unduly burdened by the impacts of climate. One of the other reasons that we're concerned about climate change in the context of migration is that increasingly in the United States, we are seeing climate be a driver for foreign migration into the U.S. I was recently on the southern border doing some work, and one of the increasing reasons that people were fleeing to the United States is because their livelihoods were being threatened by impacts of changing climate. And so this is something that we need to be acutely aware of as we're creating responses both to climate as well as migration. In terms of our economic wherewithal, as I mentioned, Alaska's economy is really transforming. We have been, for the last few decades, a state that has derived most of our revenue from the petroleum sector. As you can see in this graph, at least a third of our economy has been rooted in oil and gas, and that will change, and it has been changing dramatically to the point that many of our institutions are facing threats as a result of declining revenues and also declining amounts of oil being taken out of the North Slope of Alaska, where most of the oil that we have it comes from. So we're looking at what can we do to ensure that we continue to maintain an economic infrastructure in our state. And those are questions that we are, like we're doing with environmental changes that we're seeing, we're increasingly integrating the role of newcomers and rural Alaskans into the solutions as we face these challenges. So in terms of equity, the question I think that we face in Alaska and throughout the North is who are we and how are we changing? Because I think that if you look at the dynamics of immigration, the North is increasingly a destination for people. But it's also really important for us to recognize that we are a place that is absolutely rooted in indigenous lifeways, cultures, and values. And we cannot ignore that. If we do, we do it to our peril. And then in addition, we have so much to learn from the traditions and customs and lifeways of people that have lived on this land for 10,000 years and for whom change is a constant. So you overlay the richness of indigenous communities with newcomer populations, and it makes for an incredibly interesting mosaic. And in fact, a few years ago, we worked with a demographer at our local university who basically uncovered the notion that Anchorage is one of the most diverse, ethnically diverse cities in the country. A lot of that does have to do with the strong indigenous populations and numbers that we have here in our city and in our state. And increasingly, immigrants and foreign-born Alaskans are playing a role in that diversity. You can see from this slide that in Anchorage, our population of newcomers has been on a steady increase. It is now a little bit over 10.5%, which is a pretty dramatic change from recent decades and even from 10 years ago where it was barely over 9%. And we anticipate that these levels are going to continue to rise in much the same way. And I realize that the type is really small on the two graphs on the right, but the colors that are depicted in the circles that you can see demonstrate the increasing diversity of people who we have living in our state and the languages that we speak. In Anchorage, we speak over 100 different languages. 20 of those languages are in all likelihood attributable to Alaska Native languages, but the rest of them are foreign languages. And so unlike Moncton, which is hoping for a third of their population to become or to be French-speaking, we have some really unique challenges and opportunities with the linguistic diversity that, that we have here. So what we've been doing over the last 5 years since we've initiated a Welcoming Anchorage program, which I'll talk more about in just a moment, is we have really been trying to understand not only through the demographic research that was done by the University of Alaska, but also working with other partners such as the New American Economy, which is an organization based out of New York, to understand what the economic contributions of immigrants and refugees are in our city and in our state, so that as we're understanding the impact of an increasingly diversifying cultural community, we're also understanding simultaneously some of the economic benefits that may result. And I was surprised, not shocked though, by the numbers that we generated when taking a deeper look at the economic values that immigrants and refugees bring to our city and to our state. And the information that's up here is a snapshot from the research that was done looking at the city of Anchorage. We have data from the state as well that is included in the resources that are made available today. But if you look, you can see that almost $2 billion of the city's gross domestic product are generated by foreign-born Alaskans, and that over half a billion dollars, of the city's spending power is similarly generated by newcomers. So in terms of how we're hoping to integrate newcomers and create a community that is more welcoming and more just, the very first thing that we're doing as a city is we are looking to who we are and who our values are and what it means to be of the North and in the North. And we have really rooted ourselves in a lot of the work that's been done through the Arctic Council, which spent a lot of time thinking about Northern values. And the Northern values that were articulated through the Arctic Council and Arctic Human Development Research has been that the North is unique in that in addition to understanding well-being in a more traditional sense in terms of gross domestic product and in terms of literacy rates and longevity rates, there are 3 domains of well-being that really drive well-being in the North. And those domains include notions of how self-reliant are we? Anchorage and Alaska is far from our U.S. capital, and our city of Anchorage is similarly far from our statewide capital. And it's really important to understand that the distance between us and the people that make decisions that impact us is a tremendous player in our fate and our future. And so really the effort has been driving toward how can we make sure that we can be self-reliant and independent enough that we can ensure a good fate and future for our communities? At the same time, we are a city and a state that is deeply, deeply rooted in culture, not only in Indigenous culture, but increasingly in the cultures and lifeways and viewpoints of foreign-born Alaskans who are, as I said, moving more and more into northern communities. And then finally, this notion of place and where we are on the planet and where we are in our own state has been really, really important. And so these are the values that have informed the way that we've developed our northern strategy. The strategy itself is manifested in a couple of different documents that there are the front covers that are here, and these roadmaps are available as part of the resources. We've done two major efforts over the last 5 years. One has been to develop a Welcoming Anchorage roadmap. We joined Welcoming America, which is a national network of cities and counties around the United States whose goal is to make sure that communities are fully capable of integrating newcomers by working with receiving communities. And so we've really taken on those models and those standards locally, and we've adapted them to our needs. And then simultaneously, we recognize that in order to build a welcoming community, we need to make sure that all people in our city are able to sustain when acute shocks and chronic stresses challenge our livelihood. About a year ago, we experienced the largest earthquake that we've felt since the 1964 earthquake, which debilitated our city. And it was at that moment that we experienced that quake that I think really drove home the need to ensure that we had resilience amongst all of our different neighborhoods. In other words, that we have the capacity to withstand shocks and stresses. And I think that the work that we had done prior to last year's earthquake really demonstrated that work had merit and that work had impact, because people really came together. There was a sense of cohesion and camaraderie in our community as we worked through that crisis. So as you see here, both our resilience and our welcoming roadmaps are very much rooted in a sense of value and in a vision for who we are. And then what we've done is we've developed different approaches and pillars that then drive actions that the city has taken. So for example, in the welcoming roadmap, we have 5 pillars, including civic engagement, safe, healthy, and connected communities, educated communities, opportunities for economic development and entrepreneurship, and then notions of equitable access, which include language access. And so we've taken all of this together, and the screen that's up now is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And the reason that I'm adding this is because I think that what we've done up here is really understand that place and people define who we are and where we want our future to be. And so we've taken Maslow's hierarchy of needs and we've adapted it to reflect that there are unique northern values and northern visions that include a community that becomes self-reliant, deeply connected with place, and one that is culturally vibrant and vital. And all of the variables that we think of typically as basic needs, but also things that create aspirational principles and values and opportunities for our residents are integrated and included and available to all residents. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mara. That was fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing this story of a booming Arctic city that is framing its immigrant future in its northern values and in the context of the diversity of its own cultural landscape and its cultural past. I'm really impressed with the way the city is integrating the climate into its context for understanding what the kind of adaptation that's needed for in this changing economy that we're all interested in. I think we're going to be following up with you for more insights about the impact of climate on our not just northern but rural and regional economies as well. So thank you very much. Before we move on to our public Q&A, I have a few questions. I was going to ask you both about the specific, we always say that cities, in fact in our experience, that cities of migration are more similar than they are different across geographies and jurisdictions. But in this, today, with such a variant, we heard a great deal about how important specific context is, and I thank you both for addressing that in Moncton with the Francophone context and in the North in the particular issues there. So I'm going to skip quickly to the question of sort of the planned trajectories of your local immigration strategies. One of the challenges always for municipally led strategy is political change. So how do you plan for the future when politicians and budget officers often have a short-term mindset? What have your cities done to ensure that these incredible plans and strategies are going to continue to work for the future of your communities? Maybe we can go to you, Angelique, first in Moncton.
Sure. So our strategy is very much, it's municipally led, but it's very much a regional strategy. And our strategy is actually in line with the province of New Brunswick's population growth strategy. So the stronger we are as a region, as Greater Moncton, the better that's going to obviously benefit overall population growth for the province of New Brunswick. So that's important to note that when we were designing our updated strategy, that it is in line with the province of New Brunswick, so they're mutually supportive. Our premier has also said that population growth and labor market is a top priority for the province of New Brunswick, and so that certainly goes to the municipal level as well. In terms of municipal leadership, our mayor and city council have all adopted our past immigration strategy and our current immigration strategy, as well as our leadership teams here as well. So we are very invested, and that is for the city of Moncton. However, our sister cities, Dieppe and Riverview, they also went through the same process as well. And when it comes to increasing budget allocations for immigration, for instance, our city recently, our city council launched a new immigration grant. And so at the beginning, we had a small amount to be able to do seed funding for projects of our partners. So for instance, international student retention strategies or creating networking videos and things like that. It's very much considered seed funding. Our city council has recently doubled that pot to help implement the strategy. So I think it's a matter of having a base and showing results, and we see now that 67% of our population growth is coming from immigration. That's only going to increase, and we need to make sure that our political leaders and people in leadership positions are fully buying in to this. And this is really for across Canada. I mean, in the future, it's going to be 100% of our population growth will be coming from immigration, I believe, by 2035. So, I mean, this is just the way that we need to go, and mid-sized urban cities such as the city of Moncton are a little bit early out of the gate compared to, other regions. However, we recognize we have to continue to invest. So for us, it starts at the top and goes down, and then, but the strategies are very much holistic and start on the ground and move back up.
That's great. And to you, Mara, in Anchorage, how do you, issues of regime change, how do you make sure that the city stays on course?
Yeah, well, so this is a really interesting question. I kept referencing 2015 as a pivotal moment in our city and in our state, and I think, you in your bio, you referenced that I have been an immigration lawyer, so I've worked with immigrant communities in Alaska for the last 20 years. And it was only in 2015 when this research was developed, and also when we changed the mayoral administration, that we began to actually acknowledge and vocalize that there were foreign-born Alaskans in our state. I think prior to that, we only identified ourselves in terms of whether we were Indigenous or non-Indigenous. So the introduction of immigrants and refugees into a question of identity has been something that's been very, very recent. And so we had a shift in mayoral administration to a much more favorable pro-immigrant administration in 2015, and then in 2016 we had the election of Donald Trump. And I think that it created a crisis and some interesting opportunities, because all of a sudden in the U.S., immigration was in the headlines every single day, but in a way that was, again, posed an existential threat, I think, to a lot of the work that immigration advocates have been previously doing sort of under the radar. So your question about changing in administration is something that we've lived through both in a positive way and in a negative way, and it is something that is absolutely at the foremost of my mind, particularly as we look down the future. In the very near future, this administration has 1.5 years left. So our mayor has 1.5 years left as mayor, and we are looking at how it is that we can embed the welcoming Anchorage movement within the community to create an ongoing sense of accountability, even when it's not driven by the top or driven from the top. And so we're looking at taking the welcoming Anchorage work that we've done, and we've been really focused on building community partnerships with institutions throughout the city, and also really making sure that everywhere we go, we're creating a pattern of there are immigrants and refugees in our city and in our state who are creating huge benefits and a huge sense of positive identity for who we are. And so we've really tried to shift the way that we articulate notions of identity. We're creating, as I said, formal partnerships with other institutions that hopefully will take on the institutional elements of the integration and welcoming work that we're doing. And then, of course, we're obviously hoping that the next administration that we have at a city level will be as committed. We are dealing in a very hostile political environment because we have a state governor who's not pro-immigrant, and then we have a U.S. president who's also very anti-immigrant. And so it becomes really illustrative that cities can be places where good integration policies can and should take place.
Yeah. Well, that's very interesting. Thank you very much. It's worth noting that both of your presentations have used an extraordinary number of well-presented and well-analyzed data so that you really understand there's a significant evidence base that's part of the strategy that both of you are rolling forward, and I think that's probably a very important part of being able to continue to make a case with and without regime change. And in fact, going to our public Q&A now, I noticed that a couple of our questions really do address issues of data and how things are measured. I have from Michael Kerr, he's interested in both of you. In order to best determine retention rates, local barriers, challenges, changes over time, do you track the ethno-racial, faith, national, gender identity, sexuality, etc. backgrounds of your newcomers? Good question. How about, let's go to you, Amara. Do you want to try that one?
Sure. So this is also very tricky in that as a city in the U.S., it's unconstitutional for cities and states to ask for people's immigration status. And so we have to figure out ways around that. And so some of the things that we do are we crunch data that is publicly available through the U.S. Census Bureau and the American Community Survey. And then we also we're conducting our own survey right now where we're asking very anonymized and blind questions regarding where people come from and whether they, whether they want to share their immigration status. And we're hoping to be able to correlate that a little bit with demographic background. But essentially where we get our data is from publicly accessible sources because we need to respect the way that our Constitution drives only the fact that the federal government can inquire about an individual's immigration status. Ethnic status is a whole different situation, and so we do try to compile that. In terms of barriers and challenges and changes over time, we are, like I said, we've done one survey in our city in 2016 and 2017 out of the mayor's office, and the mayor's office is currently working with the University of Alaska and some other partners to develop a follow-up survey to that so that we can have a pretty steady baseline of integration indicators. And so we're eager to get that survey launched probably in January and February and be able to crunch some of those numbers. But yes, it's very, very important that we track this data as best as we can and that we do have evidence-based arguments for pro-integration policies that we're promoting.
Very good. How about, and over to you, Angelique, about tracking this sort of data.
Yes, so that is an important part for us. So we do track retention rates, so overall retention rates, 1-year retention rates up until 5-year retention rates. Currently we're using the census data, so that is not in real time whatsoever. So for instance, the most recent would be like 2016. We also look at the data that IRCC, so the federal government, puts out. We're able to look at things like people's, mother tongue, how people self-identify, and things like that through the census. One of the elements that we are aware that the province of New Brunswick is looking at implementing, which will give us more accurate data and more timely data, because 2016 is still quite old data for us. We would like to see, yearly retention rates, even getting quarterly, if we could even get down to that, would even be more ideal. But we do know that the province of New Brunswick is going to be looking at Medicare data. So, and with that too, we can look at hopefully not only our retention rates annually and more accurately, but also where people, should they be leaving our region, where are they going? And so whether they're moving to other parts of, to other provinces or out of country, that we wouldn't be able to track, but through other provinces would be really interesting to look at. So we're looking at that too. In Greater Moncton, we have a lot of ethnocultural associations as well, so we do work very closely with them. And many of those ethnocultural associations have memberships, and they're often reporting back to us on the amount of members they have. And so we have over 25, I think at this point, ethnocultural associations in our community, and we work very closely with them to really get, what are the needs of their communities, and are their communities growing, or what are some common trends? If people are leaving, why are they leaving, and what are some of the concerns that they're facing? And with the next immigration strategy, we really hope to form that relationship out even more, because we feel that those entities, they're not-for-profits, those ethnocultural associations are extremely valuable to our community, both from an information sharing process, but also from really getting the vibe of what's happening within their own communities.
Oh, that's great. Mariette, I think we've answered to some extent your question. So my big takeaway on looking at data sources outside the typical census data is that we need to look much more broadly, and that there are all kinds of survey data and available, and that we need to be sort of a little more creative and a little more probing about how that stuff is used. I'm going to go now to a new question. This one different, from Peter Lang, who wants to know what is the level of support among local residents for bringing in a growing number of immigrants? How do you ensure continued support for the strategy amid the challenges such as higher housing, increased pressure on existing infrastructure, etc.? A lot of the myths and realities that are part of newcomer attraction and retention. And let's go briefly to you, Angelique, and then over to Mara.
Yes. So when it comes to public, buy-in, so we had a huge game changer for us, I think overall in Canada, but certainly for the province of New Brunswick and specifically in Greater Moncton, I can speak to, is when we had a Syrian influx. So we had, I believe at this point, we have over 1,500 Syrians, I believe. And I think per capita in New Brunswick, we welcomed the most Syrians. So, and so that was a huge change for our community. Our community mobilized around welcoming so many families over a very short period of time. And I think that was helpful from also a public awareness perspective, because it did allow people to see, real life, some of the challenges that people are facing. So a lot of community volunteers mobilized around that effort, and it also brought together many community organizations that didn't work together before. And so our goal and our challenge is certainly with welcoming more immigrants, again, over another very short period of time, is making sure that we push out information to the public. I guess one of the advantages we have in Greater Moncton is that we have a lot of jobs. So, and those are in key sectors. So in all of our, if you look at, signage driving down a street, there's hiring signs everywhere in Greater Moncton. Yeah. That certainly helps with public perception because people know that everyone is hiring. Mm-hmm. And so you don't have necessarily that same perception that immigrants are here to steal our jobs. They're here to create jobs and they're here to fill jobs. So, we still have some myth busting to do, obviously, online, and we're going to focus on that. But we have a very strong economy here, so it's a little different than some other areas. But there's still a lot of work, obviously, to do on that.
And how about Mara, for you in Anchorage?
Well, I think that what we've been really working hard to do is build this welcoming Anchorage brand and really, again, promote the visibility of everybody who lives in our city and make sure that as we're moving through our community, people are not only feeling much more comfortable sharing their voices and their visions, but also that there's a receptive place for those voices and visions to be heard and seen. And so again, we're trying to create a pattern of inclusion and belonging and being a welcoming city. And I think that we've been repeating that over and over in a way that it's sticking. And in the last mayoral campaign that we had, for example, even the right-wing candidate was talking about our city as a welcoming city. So I think a lot of it is just an awareness of who is here and then an acknowledgement of the contributions that people make. But we have a long way to go as well. And I so appreciate hearing Angelique, and I think that she presents, Moncton presents an aspiration for us in terms of the rigor and the organization that you've taken on the issues of immigrant integration, and we can only hope to get there. But in the meanwhile, what we're trying to do is, again, sort of till the soil and make sure that the receiving community is ready and willing and able to understand immigration as it continues to increase and to be much more receptive. I will point out, too, it's really interesting also to hear your experience with Syrian refugees, because having spent a lot of time in Germany and in Europe and looking at what happened there in 2015 with the immediacy and the crisis nature of immigrant integration, that is an experience that we have not had in Anchorage. And I think, because of the lack of crisis, we've been able to take our time to really build a more strong foundation for being a receptive community.
Oh, thank you both. There is a question from Felix Brandlin, who does want to know whether there are larger issues concerning racism and hostility. But let's pivot that question a little bit to have your strategies placed anti-racism and anti-discrimination measures in the strategy? Are you addressing it directly?
So that is a very good question. That is in our current immigration strategy that we're implementing. We currently do not have an anti-racism policy, and that is something that we're currently working on at the municipal level. That's extremely important. And there's always going to be that 1%, obviously, but we want to be able to certainly react quickly when that 1% does rear its ugly head, and that's something that we're committed to putting in place from the municipal level, is that policy, and then in turn that training too that would go along with that implementation of that policy. That is one of our, that's absolutely a high priority for our region.
That's great to hear. And in Mara, in your case?
Yeah, absolutely. We not only in terms of racism to immigrants and newcomers, but towards Indigenous peoples, towards the hostility and hate towards the LGBTQ community. All of this is wrapped up in the approach that we've taken. And in terms of, again, during this administration, we've seen ordinance development where we've expanded the definition of hate crimes to include people targeted based on their sexual orientation. It is a great question, and I will also say that as a member of a national organization, the Welcoming America organization, we are also beginning to articulate the need to not only talk about welcoming policies, but to address and firmly confront hate and racism. And I think everywhere you look, hate crimes are on the rise. And so really being mindful of that and integrating that into our own strategic development as organizations and as cities and as nationally networked organizations is going to continue to be so important. So I'm very, very appreciative of that particular question.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much. And now we're going to pivot to the economy briefly. We're over time. I'm going to take a couple more questions. Belita Lowers wants to know, both of you talked about the quality of your partnerships, your community partnerships, and Belita wants to know which strategies work best in reaching out to employers. How about you, Mara, again?
Sure. So one of the partners that we're able to work with is an organization called West Global Talent Bridge. It's World Education Services, and they have a component of their work. I know that Cities of Migration works closely with West. We have been the beneficiary of a year's worth of technical assistance in building pathways for newcomers to enter into the healthcare sector. And so we're creating a model as we speak to reach out to employers to figure out ways that we can make employing newcomers much easier, and that we can train and have credential recognition a much easier process for newcomers. And then what we're really hoping to do is take the model that we're developing in that known sector and push the envelope on creating new sectors. And that's why I mentioned the economy and the challenges that we're facing in the North. Because as we move away from petroleum as a source of, as our main source of income and revenue for our state, we're increasingly looking at what are other sectors that we can develop. And I think that one of the most promising sectors that we have in our state is the renewable energy sector. And so anything we're doing within the healthcare sector and the work that we're doing with West, we're looking to develop a model of integration also for emerging economic sectors. So we've begun to reach out to, for example, solar panel companies in Alaska who are new and are beginning to grapple with the fact that there's no great workforce for them. So we wanted, we just resettled a group of Ukrainians, many of whom have experience or are experienced electricians. And so it's matchmaking the employers and the employees. And I think that the Welcoming Initiative is uniquely situated to bring those two sides together and hopefully, again, move our state forward in great ways. I will also say that this, I think, helps with a lot of the rhetoric and the ground paving for being a more inclusive community. When you can build opportunities for rural residents and newcomers to be at the forefront of emerging economic sectors, that changes the way that we talk about people. Again, it's not taking our jobs, it's making our jobs.
That's great. How about, and over to you, Angelique, for, how have you reached out to employers? Any strategies to recommend to make that work better?
Sure. So we have one of our working groups off of the Local Immigration Partnership is a labor market working group. And so I guess the advantage of being like a smaller city, a mid-sized urban city, would be that, we work closely together. So the province of New Brunswick leads a large portion of employment and training for newcomers. So they have a variety of programs that they put in place to work with local employers and are launching more almost on a monthly basis. Also, for the City of Moncton, my position is in economic development, so we do regularly meet with our local employers to talk about, leases and retention and things like that, and employers have indicated over and over again labor market challenges and accessing talent. So that's why we've created those newcomer and international student job fairs and filled almost 300 positions, and we continue to do those. We have another one coming up on January 24th and another one after that in March. So those are a great way for us to reach out to employers. But the interesting part is at the beginning when we started to do those regular job fairs, we would be happy to get 6 to 10 employers about 3 years ago. And now we've moved to our basically to a huge space, and we max out on the amount of employers that can attend. So we've seen a shift for our local employers, whereas now we have a waiting list for those job fairs, just to give you an example, because employers are really recognizing the, I guess, the talent and the expertise that immigrants are bringing, and they also recognize that in Greater Moncton we have close to full employment. So a lot of those new workers that businesses are going to be getting, well, they're going to be immigrants or people moving to Greater Moncton from other parts of Canada to fill those needs.
Well, that's great. Well, I've got one more question for each of you, and I'm going to go straight to you, Angelique, because I love this part of your story. I have a question from Madison Mizau, who is with the Timmins Economic Development Corporation, and she wants to know about recruitment and whether you actually travel to attract newcomers to your region. And I know that you can tell this, give us an answer very quickly, because so why don't you do that, and then I'll move on to Mara.
Yes, so we're firing on all fronts in Greater Moncton and in New Brunswick. So we do active recruitment. So the City of Moncton does go, for instance, with the province of New Brunswick as well as local employers internationally as well as nationally to recruit newcomers and post-grad international students to our region. So we're very involved with that. And people can find more information on all those attraction missions on the Welcome NB website for the province of New Brunswick. So we do partner on those missions. We attend them regularly, and they're certainly important for us to be there as well because we're best to sell our region. And then also on the passive side, we do that as well. So that's the purpose of our Immigration Greater Moncton website. It's really as an attraction tool for new immigrants. We also have a newsletter as well and do many other things, for instance, on LinkedIn, very active. So we're very much firing on all fronts and very committed to boosting our population through immigration.
Oh, that's great. And a last question, this one for Mara from Cavi in the town of Unity, just returning to some of what you were talking about earlier. She says one of the major challenges faced by new immigrants is that they have foreign qualifications that aren't recognized in Canada, and they have to undertake additional training to get the certification they need. So what has been your experience in helping newcomers smooth that transition when it comes to certification or foreign qualification recognition?
It's something that we are very actively doing, again, in partnership with WES, World Education Services, and they've got an amazing program called the Skilled Immigrant Integration Project, where they are creating a network of communities around I think Canada and the U.S. to address exactly these issues, because there's no national standard for credentials evaluation, and it's something that is not readily available in our state, and people have to go to their own private expense to do this. So we are in the process of creating a model to work with employers to recognize not just credentials, but also competencies. And I think that move from credential only to competency as a way of evaluating skills and eligibility for particular jobs is really important. The other thing I will mention too is that as economies are shifting and hopefully moving into more renewable sectors, there are opportunities to create different job classifications and different skills that are required for those jobs. And so I think we have, again, an opportunity to really remold the way that we're doing workforce development and really, again, have newcomers at the cutting edge of that. But this is a problem and a construct, I think, that this is why networks like Cities of Migration and WES and the Welcoming World are so important, because we need to be able to learn from each other and figure out good best practices, and particularly in the absence of any sort of national standards.
Thank you very much. Thank you both. Mara and Angelique, we're at the end of our Q&A. Before I go, I'd like to ask each of you for the final question. I'm looking for a very, very short answer. If you had to leave us with one important message to share with people about the role of municipal leadership around this immigration imperative that we've been discussing today, what would that be? What would that one short message be? Let's go to you, Angelique.
I guess my message would be that immigrants are moving to a country, a province, but they are moving to a city, and cities need to be at the table both from the attraction piece but also from the settlement perspective as well. It's often at the municipal level that there's cracks that can become apparent, whether in the economy or within our social systems. Municipalities can often play a very active role in helping to resolve problems, or also, basically advocate on behalf of their residents. So it would be certainly to look to having cities more involved on all levels of the immigration process.
That's great. Thank you. And how about you, Mara? Your message.
I once heard it said that cities are laboratories of innovation. And I think that nowhere is this more clear and more true and more of an opportunity than with issues of bridging between cultures and ensuring good integration and inclusion policies. And so I would just encourage all of us who live and work in local communities to engage with our local community leaders to ensure that people who are here have opportunities to engage and to belong.
Well, thank you very much. Brilliant, both of you. It's been a great hour. Thank you. Our time has run out. Thank you all for joining us here today to explore this rich set of ideas on our immigrant future. And today's session is part of a new webinar series on building a welcoming economy for Canada's smaller cities, towns, and regions. And of course, we're always learning from the world. Thank you to Anchorage. So on behalf of Cities of Migration and all our participants, let me thank guest speakers Angelique Reddy-Kalala in Moncton and Mara Kimmel in Anchorage for really a brilliant exchange of ideas. A special thanks to Evelyn Sue, our Learning Exchange Coordinator and producer par excellence, and to our audiences in Cities of Migration everywhere. Imagine this excellent work being interpreted in your city, adapted by your organization, or changing your neighborhood. We'd like to hear from you. We'd like to hear your stories and share more good practices, so please stay connected.